Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. Today we're going to talk about Batman New Gotham Volume 1. Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent Casina. Whoops. Hey everybody, and welcome back to BK's Bullets. As always, I'm your host, Brent Casina, and today we're going to be talking about Batman New Gotham Volume 1. Now, this is a bit of an older trade, a couple years old, so I'm not sure if you'll find it in your local area. DC seems to have things go out of print very, very quickly in terms of availability or finding it. I ordered mine online, I think, so you might be able to pick it up, but it does have the newer DC logo, so I think there's a better chance rather than you trying to find the old Batman Evolution trade, which was, I think this was originally collected as Batman Evolution with New Gotham Volume 2 or Volume 1 on it. Like my Officer Down trade has the thing here, says New Gotham 2. So New Gotham 1 maybe was this original thing, because this ends right before Officer Down begins. But this one is basically collected to highlight Greg Rucka, right? Like Greg Rucka, Sean Martinborough, Steve Mitchell, that's who the names are on the covers here, and that's who does most of the work inside. This is so stylized and so kind of strange to read. Every arc basically picks a different color set and says, I'm going to focus only on these two colors in this palette and only use those. So it's very stylized. If you don't like the look of these pages, you might not like reading this book, if that really, really bothers you. It does let you know what storyline you're in, though, when you flip through the pages of like, oh, I'm in the orange and blue section, so I know this is the first issue, or I'm in the red and black section, so I'm in the major storyline, or I'm in the green section later on, so I'm in the follow-up storyline. Like, every storyline has a different color set, which kind of sets it apart from other books on the stands at the time. Definitely. I know Sean Martinborough from reading Thief of Thieves from Robert Kirkman and some other writers, and I really fell in love with his art there. That is a newer, more evolved version of this, although I would say this is along the same lines, but it's not as refined as that one is. Still strong, but it misses a little bit, I think, because of the coloring. Just from my recollection, loving Thief of Thieves so much that this stuff in particular here, as earlier as it is, 20 years earlier or something like that, 15 years earlier, plus the coloring just is like, I'm not as in love with Sean Martinborough's stuff in this book as I was on Thief of Thieves. That's not to say it's bad. I think it's still very strong, very good, but it seems very early, I guess you would call it. It's like if you look at Jim Lee on Justice League versus Jim Lee on Hush, his Hush stuff, especially the earlier issues, his Batman's not very defined, whereas like by the time we get to Justice League, even though he's still, 30 years into his career at the time, he knows exactly what all the characters look like and what he's doing, whereas like Batman Hush, if you look at that first issue onto the 12th issue of that storyline, Batman looks totally different because Jim Lee evolved how Batman looked throughout and figured out how he actually wanted to draw him. So there's a little bit of that here with Sean Martinborough, but I still think it's strong. It's very Phil Hester-y, so if you like Phil Hester and his Green Arrow stuff, you'll fall in love with this in the same style here. More of that cartoony illustrator, comic book style rather than like the super stylized stuff of David Finch, Jason Fabok, Jim Lee, that kind of stuff. So think Phil Hester and you'll fall in love with this. Actually, Phil Hester does a couple issues in here, and it's great. I really love Phil Hester's stuff, so that's fun. So New Gotham, what is this exactly? Well, New Gotham is the turn of phrase they use to describe the post-No Man's Land era. So we've exited Cataclysm, we went through No Man's Land, that ended, and now we're doing this New Gotham stuff. So do we see how Gotham City returns? No, absolutely not, because that shit's boring. Let's get straight to the Batman stories. That is a little bit of a downside here. I personally would have liked to have seen more of the rebuilding stuff of Gotham, but this book picks up, feels like 4 to 6 months after the end of No Man's Land, book 4 over here. that finale where like they opened Gotham back up, they just like skip ahead with the next issue. Like here's 6 months later, and we've already rebuilt a whole bunch of stuff. We've already rehired a bunch of police officers, and the city's kind of back to normal. There's really no vestige left of the destruction of the Cataclysm or No Man's Land or anything like that. And I think that's a bit of a bummer. We just go back to status quo instead of like seeing them rebuild or seeing them have the struggles of the police force trying to find enough police officers to fill their ranks and have enough people in the city. The only real thing you get here is this like clash of different groups, from people who stayed during No Man's Land and people who came back after No Man's Land. They give them a little like nickname to kind of, look down at them. There's people that left and came back. You're better off. You're a better Gothamite if you stayed during No Man's Land and suffered, rather than the people who left and had resources and came back. Even then, like Bruce Wayne is one of these people that is looked down on because he disappeared during No Man's Land and came back to Gotham after it was rebuilt. I mean, to the public anyway. We know he's fucking Batman, and we know he stayed. So that's fun. So what's in this storyline other than that, though? If we're not dealing with the fallout of No Man's Land, what are we dealing with? Well, we're dealing with more. I feel like we're dealing with some setup that doesn't really pay off here, because you get this storyline in the beginning called Evolution, which has these people that say they work for Ra's al Ghul and are giving out like little pieces of Lazarus serum in order to make people live forever, but it somehow turns people into like mutants. Like, so one guy gets bird powers, another person has snake powers, all this kind of weird stuff. But it's supposed to be eternal life, but it's also a drug that puts them under control of the villains. It's kind of convoluted. Not very clear on what it's doing. So that ends. You get a little bit of a break there with some smaller storylines, which are fun, and deal mostly with Gordon, Montoya, and Bullock. This is the Phil Hester issues here. And then you get Vesper Lynn, who's the villain we met in the first story arc. She comes back in the green issues to kind of raise her head again and further this Ra's al Ghul storyline. In fact, we do see Ra's a little bit later. So it feels like we're building up to something, hopefully, that concludes in New Gotham Volume 2, because I haven't seen it conclude here. I will say the real fallout of the No Man's Land is in this final like two-parter here. Oh gosh, I just saw the title page. It's called A Walk in the Park, Part 1. So this is the cover. Dave Johnson does the covers on these, and they're showcased brilliantly in this volume. Some beautiful covers he did for this book. But this is dealing with the fallout of Poison Ivy taking over the equivalent of Central Park in Gotham. I think it's called Robinson Park. And all of her like kids that she took in during No Man's Land, and the green people that she grew. You saw Huntress talk with one of them during No Man's Land. And, they're trying to evacuate them from the park. They threaten to burn the park down in order to get her out, because everything else is the same. Now we got to get the park back to normal so regular people can use it, because up until that point, Poison Ivy's just kind of been like, no, you stay out of my park. This is my park, and you're not coming in. So they're threatening to burn everything down in order to get her out of there. So that was the most post-No Man's Land Fallout-y issue here. There are two issues here. And it happens at the end of the book. I feel like that maybe should have been, I don't know, earlier, but I do appreciate that we read about it at all. So, being somebody who was so invested in No Man's Land, I still think it's the best Batman crossover ever. I did want to see a little bit more of that fallout, and we did not get that in here. But overall, there's some interesting storylines here. I don't know if I would recommend it absolutely in terms of like a standalone thing. I feel like if you're invested in the Gotham story arc and the storyline, it's definitely something you should check out. I wanted to check it out because it does introduce at the very end here oh gosh, is she in here? Yeah, they give Bruce Wayne a bodyguard, and Sasha Bordeaux, right? And she becomes a main character when we get to the Bruce Wayne murderer and fugitive stuff. So she's introduced in the very last issue or two of this book. And here's your bodyguard, there's her name, there you go, and then it like cuts away. So we will get to know her, I think, better in volume 2, and that's stuff I've never read before, because Bruce Wayne Murderer starts off with like Bruce Wayne has a bodyguard and she has a costume and she knows he's Batman, and there's the whole thing. So I'm wondering how we got to that point. So that's going to be in volume 2 of Batman New Gotham. So I'm interested to read that more for the Sacha Bordeaux of it all. I thought maybe she'd be introduced earlier here. That wasn't the case. I'm not sure I would be able to recommend this absolutely because there's really not a single storyline to sink your teeth into to be like, oh, that was great, you have to read this storyline. There's a lot of stuff that's just okay in here. I think it's more of a showcase for Greg Rucka and especially the Sean Martinborough and Steve Mitchell, if he's the colorist, I believe, for that style of artwork and all the different color schemes and things like that. I think that's, if you really want to look at, hey, here's a stylized Batman book, go read New Gotham. But there's nothing yet to really sink your teeth into and say you absolutely need to read this. So if you're interested in that era of Batman, I think you could seek it out. If you're not, then I think you could totally pass on this. So that's my review of Batman New Gotham Volume 1. Let me know what you guys think of this era of Batman down below. This is the Detective Comics issues number 742 to 753. And we'll see you guys next time in the Funny Pages.